You're listening to a NewView podcast, the show that brings you inside the community of Oakview Baptist Church. For more information about Oakview, visit oakview.net.
Welcome and thank you for listening with us today. Alongside Josh Tysinger, this is Cameron Brooks, and we're excited for what we have for you today. We have two incredibly gifted and wonderful teachers of music, Dan Skidmore and Kevin Taylor. Before we get to know about their musical journey and our School of Music, we want to play our game, Fun 5.
All right, so we'd like to get to know you a little better, so we're going to ask you 5 statements that we're not really sure are true or false, and you're going to tell us if they are and then tell us a little bit more about them, okay? So it's pretty easy. You'll get it pretty quick. So, Kevin, I'm going to start with you. You were born in Arkansas.
That's false.
All right, where were you born?
I was born in Berkeley, California.
All right, so, and then you moved to Arkansas, though, is that correct?
Yeah, in the 6th grade, yeah.
In the 6th grade, all right. So,
My
Dan,
father's family was from there, so we moved back.
Okay, very good. So, Dan, where are you originally from?
Originally from Morgantown, West Virginia, although born in Washington, D.C.
Okay, very good.
Earliest memories from West Virginia.
Okay, very good. All right,
So statements are for both of you here. I will start with Dan. You can play more than 3 instruments.
That is true.
Okay, on the board.
Yeah.
And in public, probably just 3, but
Okay.
violin, viola, and piano. But also some experience with cello, double bass, and organ.
Wow, that's impressive.
So I was trying to learn a little bit about the viola. Is that how you say it? Am I saying it correctly? I think I was calling it viola earlier.
Yeah.
So it's the viola.
Viola, yeah.
Okay.
Viola.
And it's a little bigger than a violin.
Yeah. So, and 3 strings in common, but 1 lower string, and then the violin, of course, has a higher pitch string.
Okay.
So, but the middle one's in common.
So is it pretty natural to be able to play both?
The biggest thing you have to learn is the clef, just looking at the notes on the page. And if you can decipher that, then you got it.
Okay.
In my opinion. So.
Right. I couldn't decipher that, I don't think.
I think so. Kevin, how many can you?
Publicly, I would play piano, clarinet, saxophone, flute.
Got a ding. That's 4.
But I can play all of the brasses and all the woodwinds.
Oh.
All right. So, Dan, this is for you. Your violin is more than 20 years old.
That is true.
All right. Whoa, I got to Wow. Yeah.
Goes back to the 1870s.
Okay. Wow.
It's an Italian maker. But yeah, the oldest violins go back to that are currently in existence. I would say are the 1500s for the Amatis and the Stradivarius in the similar, maybe slightly later 1600s.
Okay. So when did you get yours?
It was during grad school, so in early 2000s.
So it's an investment, probably.
Yeah. I'm very thankful for my parents that they were able to purchase that for me. There's no way I would have been able to purchase that.
Right. So that's just not something you just leave laying around the house.
Yeah. It's something that you take with you and never leave in a car. And
right.
Yeah, it's I guard it.
Right.
Very carefully.
I understand.
All right, so next statement is for both of you. Your first performance was before the age of 10. And was either one of you first? We'll go with either one.
True.
Okay.
For me, I was 5 years old when I started, and the part of taking the lessons was to have a concert at the end of each semester. So usually you just twinkle, twinkle at the very beginning. But,
right.
Okay. Kevin?
I was 6. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah. Started with piano lessons, but the earliest memory that I have was being on a stage when I was probably no more than 4 or 5, but in Sunday school programs and things like that. So, I mean, we were always singing something.
That's awesome.
Cameron, at 6, were you playing any instruments?
that would definitely not be true.
Right. For sure. Yeah. I think I played the recorder in elementary school, but all right. So final question. This is for both of you. And we'll start with you, Dan. You met your wife through music.
That is true.
All right. Good.
We were in the Salisbury Symphony, and for several years we knew each other and both playing violin. And then we've been married now about 5 years. So
Very good. And have a daughter?
we have a 2-year-old daughter, and that's so Elizabeth now has had to cut back on her professional playing of the violin, but she does still play the Nutcracker because there's only like 3 services. So
Right.
to get a babysitter or her mom to watch,
Right.
somebody to watch Gwen during those rehearsals.
Right. All right. So Kevin, met your wife through music?
Yes, I did. Yes,
Yeah.
I did.
Very good.
We were both in college, but we were both music majors, but not at the same university.
Okay.
We met at we were singing and dancing waiters and waitresses at the Sheraton Hotel in Little Rock.
Oh, very nice.
Lousy job.
Right.
Lousy job.
Do you
but
have any video of this or?
I think there's some bad pictures. I know I know Lisa's got a couple of pictures in an old scrapbook. I remember seeing them. But
Right.
Yeah, we were a lot younger and a lot thinner, and 40 years later, we're still married. So.
Very good. Well, we're so glad that y'all joined us today. Share a little bit about the School of Music, but we do want to continue to learn a little bit kind of about your experience. So you talked a little bit about it, but Kevin, let's start with you. What kind of really inspired you to get into music?
I've had some fantastic teachers, starting from my family. My father was a musician, just as a hobby. He was never professional. My grandmother was as well. She was an amazing singer, but they were both inspirational to me. But I started off very early with some amazing teachers that opened up a whole world to me that I didn't really know existed, and taught me a language that had no end.
Mm.
And I just had the opportunity to keep learning and learning. And when it came to what would I major in college, there was just kind of like no question. It was music.
And not only that, so from your experience, you also went on to teach others, right? So you became a teacher.
I did. I taught. I was a public school band director for 30 years, and then became an administrator after that.
Right.
For the last 5 years. So I was in the public schools for 35 years.
Right. Dan, what inspired you to get into music?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I was born into a musical family. Both of my parents my dad being a cellist, mom playing flute. And I had an older brother who was in that Suzuki violin program already going at it. And I know that I wanted to just do what he was doing. So that was part of how I got started. But as far as doing it professionally, I really never had any intention of doing this professionally. I kind of stumbled into it, I guess, partly through a music scholarship in college, but just kind of being aware of how competitive the field is and how few jobs there are, and just to do it for realistically, I just thought it's not. But I thought I'd go through the music degree and then I'd figure out what I really wanted to do. And so somewhere along the way, I just, it's just a part of the journey of faith as well, and learning kind of sensing a calling in your life, I think is part of that as well, that, wow, I think this is where I need to be.
Right.
So it's an interesting, there's an interesting tension that goes on, I think, in figuring out where you're supposed to be in life. But
Yeah, for sure.
So you both mentioned about education. So we'll start with Kevin and then move to Dan. But where did you go to school as far as for music? And then from there, like, what does your music career look like?
Well, I started with, I was at a school, my high school was arts related. And then from that, I graduated into my undergrad, where I have 2 bachelor's degrees. I have one in choral music and one in instrumental music, both certifying me to teach in both of them. And then my master's is from Arkansas State University, but that was purely in education. And then I have an administrative degree past that. So my highest degree is technically as an ed specialist, which puts me at a superintendent's level in a district.
Okay.
All of my degrees are in violin performance. I started in West Virginia University, which is in my hometown where I grew up, and just received a scholarship to study there, and so that was part of how I was there. Did master's work at Northwestern in Chicago, Northwestern University, and again, a scholarship made that possible. there was an ensemble called the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, which offered a full paid ride to any school in Chicago if you happened to get it, and I happened to get it.
Wow,
And that's just probably one of the most fortunate things that ever happened in my career. Because even in they re-auditioned the orchestra every year, and in the subsequent years I didn't even get back in. So it's just it's kind of you just never know. Auditions can be kind of fickle, and so I did master's work there, and then I wound up in Greensboro to do a doctorate over at North Carolina Greensboro School of Music in violin performance. So those are where I received my training. So
Right, and since then, what's your career look like in music?
It's mostly been orchestra playing. I started in the West Virginia Symphony. When I finished the master's degree, I played for 1 year in the West Virginia Symphony, and I taught violin over at a small school in Frostburg, Maryland. And that was a university. There was a lady who taught all the bowed-stringed instruments, and I had to fill in. She was taking a sabbatical, and so the reason I got the job is because I did have a little bit of experience on cello and bass, so that's why playing more than 3 instruments came into the picture. And then, so after UNCG, then I've been playing with the Winston-Salem Symphony and Greensboro Symphony, Salisbury Symphony, teaching over at Elon University, Appalachian State, UNCG. I filled in most of these right now. I'm teaching at Elon University, and but I've also gotten into the music ministry, directing choir over at Guilford Baptist Church. I've had a little bit of experience prior to that, but that's a part of the career I had no idea was coming. So you just how certain doors will open up you never expected. So, or like singing and dancing at the Sheraton, I'm sure wasn't the original vision. So
Right.
you never know.
Serendipity.
Right. So, and Kevin, you've led music at churches before too? Is that correct?
Yes, I have. For 3 years, I was a church music director early in my career. It was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I've always been involved in church music. I've always been in the church choir. I've always been in orchestra. We were in handbells. I mean, if it had music in it, my wife and I were in it. But as far as being a music minister, I did for 3 years. And then it just, my school demands, because, I mean, you know what a high school band director has to do. You got football games, and you got, marching contests on Saturdays and Tuesdays, and the week is just, has 10 days in it, and it was just ridiculous. But that kind of had to fall by the wayside. But I never left the ministry as far as being on the participating side. It's just that I had too many irons in the fire to stay as a director.
So, kind of both of you again, but have you performed in any unique places or in front of anybody famous or anybody unique? So we'll start with Dan on this one.
Okay. I was probably the first celebrity that I played for was Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So,
Wow.
He was in attendance at a performance of a John Rutter Requiem that was up in Pittsburgh area. So that was beyond that. I did play in Oprah Winfrey's apartment, or it was a reception when I was in Chicago. It was through the Civic Orchestra. Just asked, we need a string quartet that can do this, and so that was one of the weird ones that I didn't actually see her, but I was there.
Wow.
I'm trying to think if beyond that, most of the the music celebrities would be who I've like Yo-Yo Ma, Itzhak Perlman, Van Cliburn, Pinka Zuckerman, Daniel Barenboim. So some of these are classical music kind of giants, you would say, that I've just happened to, because of being in the orchestra, they'll cross paths that way. So, but they wouldn't know who I am from anybody else. But
when Mr. Rogers was there, did he change his sweater and put
yeah,
on some
and
different
shoes.
shoes?
Yeah, take off the shoes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. And then just some, it's something when you have enough money just to hire an orchestra to come and play in your apartment, I guess.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
Pretty incredible. How about Kevin?
As far as audience members, I really don't know. I know I have directed some pieces that were where the composer was actually present, and that was a lot of pressure. But as far as unique places, Lisa and I used to, we did it for 11 years. that we took an honor band and choir to Europe every summer.
Wow.
And so we performed in some pretty unique places. We performed in London, we've performed in Paris, we've been in Austria, Germany, several places in Italy, and then we've been in Amsterdam to perform. And it was always exciting, always very exciting, because you never knew who was going to be in the audience. But, you know, it was a cultural exchange as far as anything else, because we took kids from our own state that were selected and had to audition to be in these groups. And then they had the opportunity to perform all over Europe. So it was really great.
So that ranks up there right up with serendipity.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there a place as a musician, is there a place that when you're playing, you're like, this is such a good sounding, cool place to play in? Is it different in different places, or?
Yeah, so certainly the rooms can have very live acoustic or very dry. Trying to think where.
It's just like you singing in the bathroom, you know.
Yeah.
The acoustics are different there than if you sang in the kitchen or the living room. But yeah, there are places that are designed for performance that really enhances the sound. But then there are places that are just the opposite.
Yeah, that's well put.
Yeah,
I think,
I mean, I usually sound good when I'm in the bathroom.
Exactly.
When I come out, it's like, it just goes downhill from there. So,
So it's the room.
it is the room
It's
for
the
sure.
room.
Yeah. So how are y'all using the gift that God gave you to bring Him glory through your music?
Certainly, I think there can be some subliminal ways that through just the language of music itself. I think that is mysterious. It captures some of the deeper emotions that put into words, things that can't be put into words. But in teaching others, I do incorporate some biblical truths, especially in terms of dealing with stage fright. I think there's a spiritual component to the battle in the mind that goes on that I'll try to make people aware of. That some of this is not just nervous feelings. There's actually am I even worthy to be doing this? Or kind of questions that can be happening. That you need to practice with God as your audience. I think is always aware that He is listening all the time. So I think that takes a lot of the pressure. It can if you develop a healthy appreciation for that in the way you practice, then it enables you then to stand in front of really whoever. So in stage fright, I think is a big area.
Well, it's to use the gift, and I've always felt this way very strongly, and I used to instill this in my teaching as well, is that the gift that you have doesn't just come from the air. It comes from God, and you've been given this gift. You've been blessed with this gift. It's your obligation to use it to serve and honor God, to turn it back to something that will honor and praise Him. And being a church musician has always been an integral part of my life, and in not only in just my performance, but I've been a composer too as well since early on, even before I started in college. But I did take some composition in college as well with some amazing teachers, and learned a great deal. And I taught theory for 20 years. But to use what I write in order to serve the Lord, there are two pieces that we're doing this year for our Easter cantata that are by me. And so it's been a challenge, and the choir has really, really stepped up, because the music is not easy by any means, and they're doing a wonderful job. The orchestra's doing a fantastic job with it. So, and let every note praise God.
Well, I think that's great. So for example, we both work with either kids ministry or college and career ministry, and what we like to encourage a lot is like leveraging what God has given you for the kingdom and for His glory. And so, I guess I can probably speak for you too, but for me, music is not one of those areas for me. I played trombone when I was younger. I really enjoyed it. But it's one of those things where, as I see people like you who are allowing the God-given ability and gift that just has been placed on you to either compose or to teach, to play, has just been just not only incredible sitting here to listen to, but also to see in the ways that you have both been integral in that, as far as even at NewView and elsewhere. And so thinking through that, you both are part of our School of Music here, and so you both play a very vital role in that. And so just for those of you who are listening with us right now, they might not even know how this came to be. And so just kind of give us some insight as far as how the School of Music came to be and what you've envisioned with it.
Well, it first came about through a conversation that Don and I had, and that he had kind of felt a burden on his heart that he thought that it would be an interesting way to expand the music ministry in our own church by allowing the church to be used to accommodate lessons, both privately and group lessons, for people that are interested in learning the ability, the art of learning to play an instrument and then applying that instrument to using it for the Lord. And so through that conversation, we kind of put a time frame to it, and then we started looking for instructors. And then Dan happened to come and visit our church one Sunday. It's like, thank you, God, you know. and you know, what more of an omen do you need? You know, you get the word, and it's just progressed on from there. And we have 5 very, very qualified and very gifted faculty members.
All right, and so Dan, you've taught a lot of students music. Do you think music, that anybody can learn it, or do you think it is a gift that God gives a person?
Well, absolutely. It primarily it's a gift that God has given, but I do think that there's a certain amount of gift that anybody can learn to either to appreciate it or to develop some level of proficiency with. But there are definitely different levels of giftedness in students, and certainly a lot of it is just they have to have an ear for it. There's a certain fine tuning of hearing that goes into it that is will be revealing of whether or not you're going to be able to take it to the highest level or not. But all kinds of levels at which people can develop some musical proficiency is a good word.
Right.
I agree. I couldn't have put it better myself, but it's just like music is in all of us. It's just like our innate need to worship God, because we all have this emotional response when we hear music. There's a fantastic book, if you've never read it, This Is Your Brain on Music. You know, the old saying, this is your brain on drugs, but this is your brain on music. And it's a study of the impact that music has on the brain. And it's amazing the things that we don't even realize that it does to us and for us, and how it promotes us and feeds us emotionally. And so, can anyone be a musician? Absolutely. Can anyone be an athlete? Again, the answer to that is, well, it depends on what degree you take it to.
Gotcha.
But everyone has the ability to enjoy it, appreciate it, and participate in it. And we encourage everyone to.
So thinking about that, this kind of dives into another question for you both. I mentioned that I played trombone for a couple of years, actually, in jazz band.
You're hired.
I've inserted myself. Did you play any instruments?
Just the recorder.
Just the recorder, okay.
Yeah, and I
You're
played
hired.
a little cowbell on the side.
Cowbell.
We always
So is
need
he
more
hired?
cowbell.
Yeah, we always need more
Need more cowbell.
That's true. So when we think of that, right, like, do you, like, for this School of Music, does anybody have to have any experience walking into the door, or is this open for anybody? Just what do you think about that?
No, there's no experience required. Though if you have taken lessons, then we'll take you from where you are. And that's the whole premise behind the instruction that we do, is that each student is an individual. Each student is where they are in the musical journey, and it is a journey. And you have to take one step before you can add on to the next one. And it's a cumulative process. The more you learn, the more you can do. And so once you start that process, it doesn't matter where you are in your own musical development. We can take you from whatever point you are to where you want to go.
And speaking of that, 2 of my students are pianist and organist here at Oakview, but they're total beginners on violin and cello, but they want to do it. And so it's an interesting mix of, total beginner in one sense, but yet they totally understand the notation and the rhythm and all that.
Yeah.
But transferring it into a new instrument is an interesting
And that's nice to think through too, though, like the continual learning mindset.
Absolutely.
music. So bringing that up as far as to people who've already learned another instrument, but are proficient in that instrument in reality, are still have
Right.
that mindset
Right.
of learning.
It's a never-ending process because, and I used to tell my students this all the time, that, if you want to play sports in high school, that's fantastic. Go for it. But, there's going to come a point in your life that you're not going to be able to continue to get out there and, be tackled or shoot that basket or jump, But you can never stop. You never have to stop playing an instrument or singing or whatever, or using your musical ability. It's something that you can do from the moment you start until the moment that you die. And so there's never any physical limit to it. And as long as you're willing to learn, and you put forth the effort to do the work that's necessary to learn the skill, there's no limit.
All right, so tell us a little bit about what classes are offered, what instruments are being taught right now.
Well, we do group and individual lessons. Primarily what we have started right now is just individual instruction. For the keyboards, we have piano and organ. And then in the strings, Dan's territory, he does the violin, viola, and cello. And then I do the woodwinds. I do clarinet, flute, the double reeds, oboe and bassoon, saxophone, of course. And then I do the brasses as well. We offer trumpet, French horn, trombone, and tuba. And then we have a guitar teacher that does acoustic, electric, you name it. He's phenomenal. He's just a great player. And we have 2 piano instructors, and then one that does piano and organ as well. So there's 5 of us on the faculty. So anything you want to play, I think we have you covered.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
I think we might need to join in at some point, right?
Yeah, we could have a whole orchestra to this thing, couldn't we?
Yeah.
You could.
So what does a typical class look like? Like, if for our guests who are listening, so if they just decided to sign up, what does a typical class look like? And I know that might vary, have variation depending on what time of the semester or process it is, but
Yeah, for me, I'll break it into, for the beginners, it's been essentially 2 parts, kind of like a technique builder and then repertoire or learning pieces of music. And then as you get older, if you develop in in your ability, then I would add in like a scale component and etudes and repertoire. But it's a half hour. Some may want 45 minutes or an hour, but in the early stages, I say a half hour is usually plenty.
Yeah. That's usually the norm, and we try to encourage the teachers to use a multi-step process to where they're approaching the music from multiple aspects, but still learning the same learning skill. And so they may do a technique study, like Dan said, then they may approach it through scale studies, things like that. But they spend certain amount of the time on building towards the literature, because the music itself is the expression of what you've learned and the application of what you've learned. So it's just like you learning to read, to read the alphabet and then learning to read Dick and Jane. So you learn one thing before you move to the next component. And so all of that is encompassed inside the lesson itself. And, it's an action-packed 30 minutes, let me tell you. But we offer 30, 45, and 1 hour lessons as well. Those are all options.
I think one of the unique thing about this school, and one thing I've seen is there's totally different ages that are involved. And so it's good for like a person who maybe just retired and maybe says, hey, I'd like to pick up an instrument, or it gives me something to do on the side. But you also are working with younger kids. What age do you think is a good age to start a kid who's interested in learning an instrument?
Well, 5 years old, I
Right.
think, is fine on the violin. Certain instruments, the winds and the brass, they usually don't start till later. But piano, keyboard, and strings, I think you can start pretty young. Usually, you want the parent to be aware of the commitment that is going into it, so that they're going to keep encouraging the kid at home, because by nature, they're probably not going to be doing it every day without some supervision or some encouragement to, this really takes some dedication to do it. So.
Yeah.
Right, and that's true. The winds and the brasses depend on the physical development of the child more so than the strings and piano do. And so, the size of the hand is essential, and the development of the lips and so on. So usually around the 6th grade is when we start wind and percussion people. But again, the development on those is up to the child. And Dan is absolutely right. We also have to encourage the parents, because not only do they have to encourage the children, but they also have to put on a happy face for a long time, because let's be honest, it's not pretty at the beginning. It's not pretty, but it certainly gets better the quicker that, and the kids progress along very nicely. So, it's a growth process.
And it's a great way to get kids off video games and doing
Absolutely.
other things. And I'm speaking just from reading articles or something, but music helps the mind develop, if I remember
Absolutely.
right.
Absolutely. There are parts of the brain that particularly develop through music that associate most directly to mathematics and to science. And so the same parts of the brain that are used to calculate a mathematical problem are also involved in interpreting and reading music.
Oh.
But then there's a deeper level to that too. And so that's why, how many of us went through elementary school and learned our mathematic facts through songs, or that we learned scripture verses and things like that through song. You do that because the brain receives that information much more readily through a musical component than it does just by learning it flat out as a fact. And so the cognitive development of those students that have been musically trained is usually higher than the student that has not. And that's purely speaking from an educational background.
Wow.
So I think this is going to be an interesting moment for our listeners, but we're going to ask Dan if he wouldn't mind playing for us a little bit here live on our podcast. We're going to let him get set up here for a second, but before he plays for us, it's just been a really good, I think for both Josh and I to just hear from just different experts through both of you as far as your abilities, as far as what God has given you, but also what I think to me the most is the most important is just thinking through of how you're actually utilizing this gift to teach others. So it's not just I'm going to isolate this gift to myself and allow that to be kind of a focal point for me, but in reality it is I'm going to leverage this to help others. And so that's just been a really interesting and cool thing to listen through both of you. And so we're appreciative of that. So without further ado, we're going to have Dan play for us. Wow, that was beautiful.
Yeah, that was great. I think one of the unique things, I lived overseas a couple years, and there I got an opportunity to meet a professional piano player. And I remember going to a church with him, and he just played for us just on the piano, and it was just a different worship atmosphere than I was ever used to. And Dan, I remember you were in our Sunday school class for a while, and you played one day in there, and I felt that same, just the instrument and you playing. It was like when an instrument's played properly, it is very worshipful, and it's very unique in that. And I mean, it's amazing because usually when I think of that, I think of somebody singing or leading, but when an instrument's just played beautifully, it's for the glory of God, and you're just, wow. I mean, and that's the same way I felt there. It's very unique.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that's our hope.
Yeah.
That's the hope that we hope to bring to people as a musician is to be able to share that, because what you feel when you hear it is what we feel in our soul when we play it. And, you know, to get that and to express that to the audience is the gift that you want.
Yeah, and another example of that was just a couple of weeks ago when you and your family were singing. You were playing the piano. When you started off on the piano, it was just I don't know. It's just a different feeling. It's hard. You just a worship mindset that you bring on. So I appreciate y'all both using your gifts in that way to help the body of Christ worship. And
Absolutely.
yep. So if you want more information about the School of Music, like to sign up, feel free to visit our website, oview.net/School of Music. If you have any questions, I'm sure Kevin or Dan would love to answer those. We'd love to have you involved. Thank you for listening today.